All right. Welcome to Here's My Thing, everybody. I'm your host, Frankie Salazar. And today's topic is going to be something that I want to talk about so unbelievably bad. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I was unaware of who this woman was or what this trial was about until literally the other day when I got the headline that Karen Reed was acquitted in the murder trial for her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. Now, if you're somebody that likes true crime or have been following the Karen Reed case or anything like that, just know that today isn't going to be anything out of the norm that you're not expecting, especially if you're somebody that's already been following the case. But if you haven't and you're just interested to hear about a crazy story involving government corruption, a murder of a police officer, and the acquittal of a woman in a 3-year-long trial during jury deliberations, then I suggest you stick around. Now, without further ado, let's just get right into the story. Karen Reed, a woman who was accused of killing her police officer boyfriend John O'Keefe in a freak accident at a party involving a night of drunken partying and fighting, all in a crazy whodunit, was recently acquitted on her second murder trial on charges of second-degree murder, and she was found not guilty on all counts. Now, unfortunately, John O'Keefe, the police officer that was murdered that night, his family is personally suing Karen Reed, as well as, I want to say, oh my goodness, I can't remember. I want to say it's either the police department themselves or maybe the bar that he went to. I'm not really certain, but I know that his family is suing on his behalf for civil return, meaning that they're going to get money. So she still could potentially be charged in a civil trial, but at this point, does it really matter? I mean, after 3 entire long years of fighting for your innocence, you're now still going to be tried civilly. At this point, who really cares? But anyhow, before we get into the nitty and gritty of the case and all the evidence provided and everything, I want to go ahead and give a brief summary of all of the main players that we're going to be discussing in today's episode, all of the people that are involved in the murder, potentially, allegedly, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to go around making allegations. I'm just going to present the facts to you guys in a way that hopefully that is easily digestible, and then we can all kind of come to a general consensus from there, okay? So first of all, we have Karen Reed. She was the woman accused of drunkenly murdering her boyfriend by accidentally, that they're assuming, accidentally backing into him, moving at about 27 miles an hour or so with her SUV the night of January 28th of 2022, going into January 29th of 2022. Then we have Mr. John O'Keefe, who is the police officer who died the night of the 29th. And then we have Brian and Nicole Albert. Now, Brian and Nicole Albert are the owners of the home located at 34 Fairview Road in Canton, Massachusetts, where the crime scene took place. And they are also, this is very important, I need you to note this here, they are the owners of a German Shepherd that they've had, their family dog since they were a puppy, named Chloe. That's very important. The next person I want to talk about and introduce you guys to is a woman named Jennifer McCabe. Now, Jennifer McCabe is going to come up within the next couple of minutes in this story as we go through all the details and everything, because she is the sister or the sister-in-law to Brian Albert and Nicole Albert. And she was the one who attended the after party and drove with Miss Reed the night of the murder or the next morning after and more or less discovered Mr. O'Keefe's lifeless body. Now, that's important. I put discovered in quotation marks, and we'll get to that in a second. Up next, we have a gentleman named Michael Proctor, who is friends, admitted in his own words, he is friends with the Alberts, and he was the lead investigator who was later fired, completely let go, suspended without pay from the Massachusetts Police Department due to his gross mishandling of the investigation. And there was a lot of conflict of interest issues and a lot of just nasty unprofessionalism on his end when it came to messages he sent about Miss Reed during the investigation. Up next, we have a gentleman named Brian Higgins, who's also friends to the Alberts as well as Mr. Proctor. He is a federal agent of the Massachusetts Police Department, and he's interesting because there was an issue with him becoming potentially romantically involved with Miss Reed. So we already have a little bit of a weird kind of love triangle entanglement here between John O'Keefe, Brian Higgins, and Karen Reed. That's also very important. That will be coming up here shortly. And as far as we know, it was just an intimate phone kind of affair. I do know that he admitted during the trial that they had shared a kiss and stuff like that. So that was definitely a growing piece to this story. And last but not least, we have a gentleman to the name of Colin Albert, who was only 17 at the time that the crime took place, but he's going to play a huge role in this, and you guys will know why here shortly. But long story short, he is the nephew to Brian Albert, the homeowner of the gentleman that we've been talking about, the one that owns the golden retriever. Now, Colin was supposedly going to be at the home celebrating the birthday of his cousin the night of the murder. And that's important, that he's already going to be at the house. So just remember that he's going to be at the house that everybody's going to the night that the crime happens. And now that we have all of our main suspects and main people involved in that night, we're going to go ahead and break down the main details for you. So for those of you that missed it or don't really keep up with the trial, here's a brief summary of it. And a timeline that I was able to set up per, I want to say CBS News. Don't worry, I'm going to go ahead and also put in all of my sources in the description down below, so that way you guys could follow with me. And I'm also going to be putting up imagery as well, as you guys already know that I do. So on the night of January 28th, 2022, everyone that we had spoken about previously had been at a bar in downtown Canton. And that bar was named the Waterfall Bar and Grill, for a night of drinks and fun with some family and friends. And the bar was supposedly going to close at midnight. So the Alberts that we mentioned, Brian and Nicole Albert, had invited everybody, including Karen and John O'Keefe, whom they claimed they've never really interacted with before. But regardless, everyone was invited just the same to go to their house for, what I guess we could call an after party. Okay, so that's the timeline. So on the 28th, 2022, January 28th, 2022, just before midnight, they're at the bar and everything, and as the bar is about to close, anywhere from 11:30 p.m. going into 1 a.m., they are all invited and are supposedly going back to the Alberts' house. Now, this is where things get sticky. So I'm going to try to do my best to break down the timeline here through all of my notes. So the timeline is as follows. So now we're in officially January 29th of 2022, and between midnight and 12:30 in the morning, everyone from the bar should have already arrived to meet at the Alberts' home for the afters. And Karen Reed was her boyfriend, Mr. O'Keefe's, ride to the place, and she leaves him there during a fight. Now, it's important to note here that they were in the car together. They were sitting in the car bickering for quite some time. It's really unclear about how long that they were actually fighting or in the car for. But regardless, after the fight, she ends up leaving. And at about 1 a.m.-ish, court documents reveal that on or about 1 a.m., Reed allegedly sends John a voicemail saying things like, "You're a fucking loser, go fuck yourself, and John, I fucking hate you." Because, and again, they had just gotten in a fight and he wasn't answering the phone. Now, it's also important to note here, I think I mentioned it just a second ago, that she did not witness him once he left the car. She did not witness him enter the house. Now, that's important. But still, during their fight and everything, he gets out of the car, she's calling him, she's blowing up his phone, and that's when she sends these nasty voicemails. Now, flash forward between 4 and 5 a.m., Jennifer McCabe, the sister to Nicole Albert, who we mentioned previously, and another woman who is Karen Reed's friend named Carrie Roberts, drive back that morning after getting a phone call from Mrs. Reed's niece, whom she went to stay with at Mr. O'Keefe's house when she went home that night. She calls Jennifer McCabe, and her, being Karen, Jennifer McCabe, and Carrie Roberts all get in the car and drive back to the crime scene, back to the house. And it's at that time that they discover, okay, I put that in quotations, they discover Mr. O'Keefe's lifeless and bloodied body in the snow on the lawn. And that's a little after 6 a.m. Flash forward to January 31st, a few days have gone by. An autopsy reveals that John's cause of death was, quote, blunt impact injuries to the head and hypothermia. Now, prosecution says that their medical examiner, quote, did not find any obvious signs of an altercation or a fight. Now, that's important because that's exactly what the defense was hinging on. Flash forward a few more days, on February 2nd of 2022, Reed appears in the Stoughton District Court and pleads not guilty to the charges of manslaughter, motor vehicle homicide, and leaving the scene of a motor vehicle collision causing death. So we flash forward a few more months, Now we're in June 10th of 2022. A Norfolk County grand jury indicts Miss Reed on even more severe charges. Charges including second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence of alcohol, and leaving the scene of personal injury and or death. Now, this trial, the initial trial, continues on for over 2 entire years and ends in a deadlock jury and is formally declared on July 1st of 2024. So now this has already gone for almost 2 entire years, or actually just over 2 years, really. The jury was, quote, deeply divided and was unable to reach a unanimous decision on 1 out of the 3 counts. Now, it's unclear as to which counts the jury was sure of, and they all unanimously voted not guilty, but one of the 3 counts they were unable to reach a conclusion. Flash forward to April of 2025, so just under, what is that? About 8 or 9 months thereafter, April 1st, 2025, the second trial is underway after the first mistrial had been declared, with the defense honing in on the inconsistencies with the state's or the Commonwealth's evidence, or I guess you could say lack thereof. And the fact that not one single witness or other individual involved that night was considered a suspect. Neither was the Alberts' home, where Mr. O'Keefe, a literal police officer who was murdered, potentially, we don't know, either premeditatively or whatever, a police officer died at the Alberts' home, and that home, during the investigation, nor the partygoers that were there that night were treated as suspects or a crime scene. Now, here's something that I think is really interesting that I should mention before we get into the evidence presented that'll be important later on. Per the judge's orders, Mr. Colin Albert, the one that I had mentioned is Brian Albert, the homeowner's nephew, was to never be implicated by the defense in the second trial whatsoever. Now that's interesting. You may be thinking to yourself, well, why would this random kid, out of all people, be one that's going to be picked by the judge and granted immunity by the judge, Judge Beverly Cannon, unless there was something that she knew that we didn't? Perhaps. I don't know. Allegedly. I don't know. I'm not pointing fingers, but just know that he's very important to the story. Like we said a minute ago, Mr. Colin Albert, the young boy at the time, was in the second trial granted immunity from the defense. Doesn't mean they couldn't question him, but he was not allowed to be implicated. Now, let's go ahead and get into some of the evidence that the state was trying to go off of. The most damning piece of evidence that the prosecution tried to use against Karen Reed was the shattered taillight on her Lexus SUV. Now, they were alleging that the vehicle, Miss Reed's SUV, was the murder weapon. Now, here's the problem with that theory. The shards that were collected at the scene were not initially collected right away. The car was immediately towed within hours of this area, because again, it wasn't the house, it wasn't the entire house, just this area where the police officer's body was found. The car was taken in and collected at the scene and was in police custody well before there was any shred of evidence that there was any DNA shown to be either on Mr. O'Keefe from the taillight or his DNA being on the taillight. Now, newsflash, there was literally no blood, bodily tissue, or DNA on it whatsoever. Now, the problem is, crash reconstructionists of the ARCCA Incorporated testified that the injuries sustained by Mr. O'Keefe were not consistent with getting struck by a car, specifically the head trauma, because in order for it to be, plausible that he could shatter an entire plastic industrial grade taillight, he would have to be hit at an unfathomably fast rate that would have caused much more bodily damage than just some head injury. And we're going to go ahead and put up an aerial view of the home over here to the left of your screens, and you can see that over here to the left side, you can kind of see like a pole that's in the grass. That is allegedly where his body was found. Now, again, it's unclear where he was even found because this investigation was so dodgy and so mishandled and grossly negligent that they actually have really no idea where his body actually was found. But what the prosecution is trying to allege to you is that somehow Karen Reed's Lexus is over here in this driveway. So she would have to make an L shape out of there accelerate up to 26 miles an hour and back into him, causing him to fly multiple feet into the air, land, hit his head, get these scratch marks on his arm and everything. And they also expect us to believe that through all of that, his phone would be tucked nicely behind his shoulder. That's what they want you to believe. That was the initial theory, was that she accidentally reversed out of this driveway onto the main road, accelerated to 26 miles an hour, hits her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, causing him to fly off with a cocktail glass in his hand still and die. That's what they want you to believe. Now, as for the marks on his arm that we had just mentioned, experts on both sides, the prosecutions and the defense, could not come up with a general consensus as to what caused these marks. Dr. Marie Russell testified that the arm lacerations were consistent with dog bites. Now, for those of you who don't know Dr. Marie Russell and you're not following this case, she is a retired ER physician and forensic pathologist. So this isn't just somebody that's looking at his arm and going, oh yeah, those look like dog bites to me. I mean, this is somebody that's literally probably, being a retired ER physician, probably had interacted with these kind of things before. Now, Scorty Bella, who I'm not actually really certain of who they are, but on the prosecution side testified that in her own words, there were, quote, no signs of what I would call a significant altercation. Because that was another theory that the defense had, was that Mr. O'Keefe was either ambushed or there was some kind of physical altercation. But the prosecution was trying to paint the picture that no, these damages were sustained by a car, but they could never actually prove that it wasn't a dog bite. And remember, the reason I'm bringing up the dog bite as a piece of evidence is because, like I said, the Alberts, who are the owners of the home that I just showed you a few moments ago, own a German Shepherd. And that's very important. The next piece of evidence comes from Mr. John O'Keefe's Apple Watch that he was wearing that night. According to the defense, his Apple Watch indicated that he took upwards of 80 steps and climbed equivalent to 3 whole flights of stairs upon the arrival shortly after to their house for the after party. Massachusetts Police Department Trooper Nicholas Guarino, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm sorry, testified that the information gathered on the Apple Watch was, quote, misleading and actually still shows him traveling in Miss Reed's vehicle at the time. Very strange. Now, my absolute favorite piece of evidence from my research that I've done so far. Digital experts and analysts disagree on both sides. They can never come up to a general consensus, and that's something that you're going to find out as a theme when it comes to this trial is experts on both sides were unable to unanimously agree on anything, from the dog bite to the crash reconstruction to why his head was hurt or where the lacerations on his arm came from or what time it even happened. I mean, there are so many unanswered questions, but this one is my absolute favorite for a couple of reasons. Now, like I said a minute ago, these digital experts and analysts all disagree as to when a certain text message may have been sent and a certain Google discovery may have been sent. Now, the text message isn't very important, but according to the defense, they allege that according to their expert, Jennifer McCabe, remember we spoke about her earlier, and I said she'd be important. Jennifer McCabe, the sister to Nicole Albert, had Googled Hos Long to Die in Cold, HOS. Now, we're assuming that she drunkenly met How, H-O-W, How Long to Die in Cold, but she ends up putting Hos Long to Die in Cold at 2:27 a.m., just 40 minutes to an hour after she alleges that she had left the party. Now, here's the thing. Whether she left or not, or made this Google image or whatever, or Google search or whatever at that time, how do you not see a dead policeman with blood all over the snow as you're leaving the home? Because keep in mind, according to Karen's own testimony and the evidence that her and her defense were able to provide, she was not at the scene at the time that he had died. It was nearly impossible. But regardless, we're going to get to that. The digital expert on the opposing side claims that the defense, quote, misinterpreted the metadata and says that the search was made a little after 6 a.m., which would be consistent with Jennifer McCabe's testimony that Karen Reed, upon the discovery of John O'Keefe, because remember, they were together, that's who she called. Karen Reed called Jennifer McCabe to go back to the house to look for John O'Keefe. Once his body had been discovered, Miss McCabe's testimony says that Miss Reed had asked her to Google what the effects of hypothermia are on the human body, or how long it takes for hypothermia to actually kill somebody. And that was kind of where the muddy water came in, because I'll go ahead and try to show the image up on the screen now. You can see that at 2:27 in the morning, a Google search had been made, but according to the prosecution, it was actually closer, you could see on the bottom, a little after 6 a.m., and they're saying that the original data expert on the defense's side misinterpreted the data, because all she did at 2:27 a.m. was open Google. She never actually went ahead and searched up the Hoslong to die in cold query. Now, I don't know how much I believe that, but again, like I said, all of this is so murky, nobody can come to a general consensus, so it doesn't really matter. We'll get into that later. But not only was the evidence very inconsistent and a lot of it, left to the imagination, the very odd behavior, for lack of a better term, I guess, of the other partygoers leaves more questions than answers to be had for a lot of reasons. For instance, within 3 months of the murder, just days before the investigation was said to be had, the Alberts, Brian Albert and Nicole Albert, the homeowners that, hosted the after party after going to the bar, had sold their home for $50,000 less than its own valuation. Not only that, 3 years prior to selling the home, they had already renovated all of the flooring in their home. But conveniently, within 3 months after this, they needed, before the sale of the home, I'm assuming, renovated the flooring in the basement completely. Ripped up the concrete, ripped up the wood, ripped up they had some kind of rubber padding because it was a home gym down there in the basement. So they renovated all of the flooring conveniently. And they also happened to what they call rehome, or what the defense calls get rid of and hide, dispose of evidence. They say that they rehoused their beloved German Shepherd for no reason. For no reason. We have a dead police officer in front of your house. You guys weren't going to be investigated anyway. I'm sure they were confident about that. But people are alleging that they may have been tipped off somehow, because within days, in that 3-month window, within days of the actual investigation beginning, all of that stuff goes missing. Oh, and did I mention that Brian Albert also disposed of his cell phone? Completely destroying it. No one knows where it's at. They're not able to gather any information off of it. And I find that a little strange. The next thing. Jennifer McCabe, who we spoke about, who may or may not have made the infamous 2:27 Hoslong to die in cold Google search. If she isn't lying about her recollection of that night, about the infamous Hoslong to die in cold text, then why does it seem as though she's trying to avoid implicating herself when questioned by the defense? Now, I'm going to go ahead and have you guys take a look at this clip of when she was questioned by defense attorney Alan Jackson. Go ahead and take a listen.
There was a Google search at 2:27 a.m., right? I mean, that's a layup, to use a basketball term, right?
There's a record, I think, of one.
Right. The record is of a Google search at 2:27 a.m. on your phone. Is that right?
I'm not a phone expert, so I don't know. I can't read.
You're well aware. You don't have to be a phone expert to know that there was a Google search on your phone recovered at 2:27 in the morning. You know that. You've been told that. You've seen it. You've been asked about it dozens of times, haven't you?
I have been asked about it dozens of times, yes.
So let's set the foundation. There was a Google search on your phone at 2:27 a.m., correct?
Which Google search are you referring to?
It doesn't matter, Ms. McCabe.
Now, if I'm somebody who's guilty, that is exactly how I would answer those questions. If you were to ask me, what I did this morning, or let's just say what I had for breakfast. And I was like, well, I don't know if I had breakfast. Well, people say that you did. Well, that's what they're saying I did. And why were there 2 eggs missing out of the carton this morning? Well, because when somebody eats breakfast, they have eggs. So did you eat breakfast? I couldn't tell you if I ate breakfast. That's exactly how she's dancing around the question. If I'm innocent of something, if anything, I would die on the hill that I did not make that search. You wouldn't have me sitting here saying, oh, I don't know, or that's what you're alleging, or that's what the evidence shows. I mean, you're caught red-handed. But here's the problem. In a court of law, unless you blatantly admit to something, there's a burden of proof there. And unfortunately, the defense was unable to make anything of that. But obviously, it still sat in the juror's mind like, why is she unable to answer such a simple question? Here's another thing. Michael Proctor, the guy that we mentioned when we did the introduction a few moments ago. Why was Michael Proctor, the designated chief investigator, the designated chief investigator, when he admitted in his own words that he was, quote, good friends with Mr. Albert, and why did it take until the very hour the mistrial was called in the first trial for him to be fired from the police department? They completely held off on that. They waited. They waited the entire time. And within 1 hour, literally within 1 hour of the first mistrial being, officiated, he gets fired. Not only that, within hours into his investigation, if you could call it that, because he testified that there was, quote, no reason to even go into the Alberts' home, even though there's a dead police officer right there with cocktail glasses and missing clothing in that house, he says about Karen Reed in text messages, quote, there will be some serious charges brought on the girl. She, quote, has zero chance that she skates. Quote, she's f***ed. And even called her a whack job. Up next, we have Brian Higgins. Now, I'm confused in particular as to why he wouldn't be implicated in the very least, knowing and admitting that he was having an affair with the very woman being tried for the murder of her boyfriend. So that to me obviously shows that there's an issue there. There's a conflict of interest there, because if me and another guy are going after the same girl and one of us ends up dead, why is she the one that's taking the fall for all of the blame? I don't know. You tell me. Not only that, he also lied on the record about his whereabouts, the hours after the alleged murder or altercation took place that night, and even allegedly destroyed and disposed of his cell phone and SIM card in 2 varying locations on military bases that no regular person, even the investigators, would have access to. Because keep in mind, he's a federal agent for this police department. So nobody was going to want to touch the guy. So he knew he was fine. But if you're totally innocent, if you know nothing about that night or his whereabouts or anything that happened to them, and you're alleging they never came into the house or whatever, why completely incinerate your SIM card? It doesn't make sense to me. Now, the last 2 people that I have a few questions for, again, are Mr. Colin Albert. Again, the 17-year-old at the time, who we mentioned previously in this episode. And not only that, Judge Beverly Cannon. I've got a few questions. Because Colin Albert, the nephew to Brian Albert, the homeowner, like we said, was allegedly at the Alberts' home for a birthday party for his cousin, Brian Albert Jr., Brian Albert's son. And we're supposed to believe that he had already left the party, he had come and gone after the birthday party, before all of the adults had made it from the bar back to the house for the after party. We're supposed to believe he's gone. But here's the problem. Not one person that was with him that night in that house actually saw him leave. And they all admitted to that and testified to that on record. Now, I find it very hard to believe that all 5 or 6 of these people would purge themselves in court, which is a punishable offense, and lie about that. And I want you all to go ahead and take a look at this TikTok video that this internet crime sleuth named Sydney Suss has to say about it. So go ahead, Sydney. Tell us your thoughts on everybody saying that they didn't see Colin Albert actually leave the home that night.
My God, I have such a Colin Albert bombshell. Out of every single person that was at 34 Fairview, none of them saw him leave, except for Colin himself. Just wait until you see all the testimonies I put together. Really quick, I just want to establish the timeline. We're supposed to believe that Colin Albert went out of his way to go to 34 Fairview to celebrate Brian Jr.'s birthday with these three. Oh, and Chloe Albert. Okay, now we're at the waterfall. The first to go is Tristan. That's Caitlin's boyfriend. He's gonna come back later. Next up is Colin's parents. Julie leaves first. She's got a headache. And then Chris allegedly walks home. Jennifer and Matthew McCabe allegedly show up at the house after Colin has left. Karen, we know, never made it in. John, we know exactly. Now we're left with these four: Nicole Albert, Brian Albert, their daughter Caitlin Albert, and Brian Higgins. Here's the lineup. Here's every person that is there when Colin is there.
Mr. Albert, you never actually observed Colin leave in a vehicle from 34 Fairview, correct?
No, I didn't see it with my eyes, no.
And you have never mentioned seeing any other vehicle waiting outside the house for Colin when you arrived, correct?
No,
You didn't see him leave.
I did not see him leave.
When you came back downstairs from the bathroom, or came out of the bathroom, wherever it was, you no longer saw Colin.
Yes, Brian's gone to the bathroom, Colin, and said that he was getting picked up.
But you never saw him leave.
No,
You didn't see him leave the house, and you didn't see him get picked up by anybody.
I did not.
You were watching Colin to see where he went after you left him, correct?
Correct.
You never saw him leave the house physically, correct?
Correct.
You never saw Colin Albert physically walk out the door, did you?
I don't remember.
You never physically watched him walk out the door, correct?
I don't remember.
You can't even say which door you walked out, correct?
I don't know.
You never saw him get picked up.
I did not know.
You never saw any car arrive for him.
I don't know.
You never saw him behind.
And now here's what Brian Higgins has to say. And remember, he got there first because he put his plow down and he did a sweep in the driveway.
Beyond the people that you described as far as seeing at 34 Fairview Road, fair to say you don't recall anybody being introduced or identified as Colin Albert?
No.
Okay, and the next clip is of Colin Albert and how he answers most of the questions while he's on the stand, except for what time did you leave?
I don't remember. Do not remember that. No, I don't remember. I do not remember. I do not remember.
Do you remember anything about this case?
At what time would it have been that you left?
12:10.
So the only evidence of Colin leaving 34 Fairview is a screenshot of a text message between him and Jen McCabe's daughter at 12:10 saying, "Here." We don't actually even know if Allie McCabe is here at 34 Fairview because, of course, they've thrown out all their phones. So everybody inside that house saw Karen Reed's vehicle move specifically 3 times out in the road, but they never saw John O'Keefe come in, they never saw him unalived when they left and drove by him, and they never saw Colin Albert leave. That's a little sus.
And if that alone doesn't implicate Mr. Albert, take a look at this photo of Colin, of his bloodied knuckles, just days after the night of the murder. And since we're on the topic of the knuckles, because you're probably thinking, Frankie, he could have done anything. You know, he testified that he had slipped and fallen and landed on his knuckles. Now, I'm no human, scientist or whatever, but a lot of people in the general consensus will say that when somebody falls, depending on whether they fall backwards or forwards or on their ass or whatever, your body tends to have a physical reaction where it puts its hands outward or upward or sideways or whatever it is, open-handed, because your brain is trying to, save you from the fall, and it's going to try to land flat and try to catch itself. I cannot tell you the last time that I've fallen, and trust me, my fat ass has taken quite a few falls down some stairs, that I've ever had bloodied knuckles. Or at least not all of them. So I don't know about that. But since we're on the topic of that, I want you to go ahead and look at how he dances around the questions as defense attorney Alan Jackson grills him on why text messages and Snapchat images containing that photo were deleted.
We go back and forth, I'd say, between platforms texting.
You switch platforms because you know that Snapchat deletes all communications, correct?
Objection.
Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
Do you know that Snapchat has an auto-delete function on it?
If your app is set to that, yes.
Your app was set to that, wasn't it?
I do not remember that.
So again, your memory is failing you.
Can you rephrase that?
Sure. Once again, your memory is failing you. You just
Objection.
don't remember.
Objection.
Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
Isn't it true, Mr. Albert, that you either switched platforms or deleted the texts because you did not want your text communications with Allie McCabe to be discovered?
Objection.
Overruled.
Is that right?
That's not true.
So where are those communications?
I do not know.
Can't produce them right now, can you?
I'm not sure.
So in the days, the hours, and days and weeks following the death of John O'Keefe, your communications with your best friend, Allie, the person who gave you a ride home that night, they're just gone. Right?
I'm not sure.
You testified that you provided Exhibit 81, what we were just looking at and you're still looking at in front of you, as a screenshot of your communications on January 29th, 2022 with Allie McCabe, correct? It was a screenshot.
You say that again? Sorry.
You provided that item as a screenshot, not as an actual text to law enforcement. Is that right?
I don't believe so.
Okay, do you know what a screenshot is?
Yes.
What's a screenshot?
When you take a picture on your phone.
That's a picture from your phone.
Yes.
Okay, so it is a screenshot.
Yes, it is.
So if his answers aren't sketchy enough, it's literally giving Jennifer McCabe from a little minute ago answering, dodging the question about the Google search. Listen to what he says when questioned by attorney Alan Jackson about who he spoke to in preparations for the trial.
Mr. Albert, who did you talk to in order to prepare for your testimony starting yesterday?
Can you rephrase that question, please?
Phrase the question. You didn't understand my question?
No.
Okay. Who did you speak to in order to prepare for your testimony yesterday?
My lawyer.
His lawyer. Now, why would he, Colin Albert, why would he specifically have his own attorney for questioning, especially when he wasn't even being formally implicated? I'll tell you why. Because to make things even messier, in 1994, a man to the name of Chris Albert, brother to Brian Albert, the hosts of the after party, father to Colin Albert, was involved in a hit-and-run vehicular homicide back in 1994. And after that homicide had happened, that hit and run had happened, he waited a little over 30 hours to actually turn himself in. Now, nobody can prove this, but they're alleging that that's probably just the right amount of time for all the alcohol to be flushed out of your body. And when he turned himself in, he didn't just turn himself in, he came lawyered up. Would you like to know who his attorney was? None other than Judge Beverly Cannon's very own brother. Now, this is absolutely insane because that means, I'm alleging here, that means that Judge Beverly Cannon's relations to the Albert family can be traced back more than 30 years. And seeing that her and her brother are already allegedly tied to Colin Albert's father, doesn't it make a little bit more sense as to why Miss Cannon would grant Colin Albert immunity from the defense? I don't know. I'm not pointing fingers here. That's for you guys to decide. But I just find it a little bit strange, don't you? Now, finally, the thing that we have all been waiting for, I hope, because it's literally the title of my show. Here's my thing. After everything I just presented to you, albeit very messy and everything, and as you can see, I have my scripts here and everything because I tried to make this as word perfect as possible. I did my best. I did so many hours of research on this video because when I cover something like this, I like to make sure I have all of my ducks in a row. But I personally find that after all of this madness, because keep in mind, guys, we just scratched the surface, literally. Like, we just scratched the surface of this case. You could go down rabbit holes for hours and hours and hours and find so many different conflicting theories, pieces of evidence, people that are involved. I mean, it's absolutely insane. But I just took what I thought was the most damning pieces and tried to come up with my own synopsis. Now, here's the thing. Whether or not you think that Karen Read is innocent of her boyfriend's murder, the jury did, in a court of law in the United States, have a duty to acquit her on the basis alone that the prosecution could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt, because that's what it is. When you're in criminal trial, especially for something as severe as murder, the state must prove, quote, beyond a reasonable doubt that you're the one that did it. Not only should she have been acquitted just on that alone, I personally believe that she's innocent regardless. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to whether people think that she was framed. Do I think she was framed per se? It's kind of hard. It is really hard because we can already see that there's no denying the blatant and egregious corruption. And not only that county's police department, but the district courts, especially the judge herself, given everything that we know, that there's no way that you can say that she wasn't at least the one that was going to take the fall for all of this stuff. I mean, let's just say, for instance, that she really did not do it, okay? Because there wasn't substantial proof that she did it, but there also isn't anything that really freed her. They just couldn't prove that she did it, you know. Regardless of that, do I think that she was framed? I don't know, because there are so many moving parts to this. But like we said, like with all the corruption with the police department and the judges and everything, it might not be that hard. But at the very least, I do think that she was going to be the one that was going to have to take the fall for it. And I think that they were just kind of expecting her to take a plea deal to try to just get out of it. But keep in mind, they did not know, who they were dealing with, because she had every right to fight back, regardless of if she was guilty or not. Now, there are a ton of theories out there, and I'm only here to deliver the facts, in a hyperbolic and comedic way, I guess. But there are so many conspiracy theories out there, and people online are suggesting things like, Brian Higgins, his motive was being the affair, which I believe. That right there implicates you because you're already party to this. You're talking to the same woman of the man that was murdered that night, and you were all there. I don't understand why he wasn't questioned. And then there's another crazy one, such as Colin Albert, the kid that we've been bringing up this whole time, allegedly trafficking drugs directly from the police department. And the reason that this all plays in is because people are alleging that Mr. O'Keefe had made reports to higher ups in the police department about this, which could have caused a lot of tension because, Colin and his father may not, and his uncle may not want Mr. O'Keefe, meddling in their drug trafficking business, allegedly. Now, I'm going to go ahead and play a clip real quick, too, because a lot of people are thinking that the judge and her corruption was in on it. Go ahead and take a look at this clip that I found of this girl alleging that the judge may be subliminally communicating with the Commonwealth or the state to make an objection. Go ahead.
Of pocket state with regard
she gasped
to
inside. She's going to touch her face.
And whether it refreshes your recollection on
smiles.
Comments, Mr. Whitman.
Objection coming.
Objection.
See? Told you. Look at that smile. And laugh. What the How is that professional? How?
And a side note on that whole thing, whether the judge is communicating with them or not, doing little winks or smiling or whatever, the fact that in a criminal trial of this stature, all anyone had to say was objection and not actually state what they were objecting to is absolutely madness. I mean, this was monkey court from the jump. Like, I have no idea, what that's even about. Now, what do I think happened? I personally think that he was ambushed. He and Karen get into their fight. He drunkenly goes into the house. Something is said to somebody or someone confronts somebody because there's also imagery of him and Brian Higgins having a little bit of a beef at the bar before they even made it to the house. I think that he goes into the basement and gets ambushed. And the dog finishes him off or is either caught up somehow in the brawl. That's where the arm lacerations come from. And then he was then dragged and lifted out of the house and dumped in the blizzard. Now, by who am I alleging did all this stuff? I really have no idea. It could have been a one-man job or it could have been a five-man job. And the reason I say it could have been a five-man job is because the defense was able to show that there was more than 5 people's DNA, 5 men's in particular, 5 men's DNA, which conveniently is the amount of men that were in that house that night, on his shoe. There were 5 men's DNA on Mr. O'Keefe's missing shoe. And another thing, after the alleged 5 men dragged him out of the house, a research analyst on Reddit, I'll go ahead and put it up now, did some digging and found in the county assessor's website that the property has an easement. Now, for those of you who don't know what an easement is, it's kind of like a legal gray area as to who actually has jurisdiction of that property. Now, this guy is alleging, because we don't know where his body was dumped, that they may have been, knowing about the easement, may have been trying to drop Mr. O'Keefe's dead body off the property line into the easement to try to get their house out of being a part of the scene, because legally it wasn't on their property. Very strange. Now, what I do know, at the end of the day, after all of this is said and done, like we covered in Here's My Thing a few minutes ago, there is absolutely no evidence to directly pin this to Karen Read whatsoever. And from the corruption of the police department, the judicial system, all of the witnesses, the tampering and the destruction of the evidence, and all the other just gross negligence and what you would call an investigation is an absolute tragedy. And it's such a shame that Mr. O'Keefe's murder will probably never, ever be avenged, because all of these people were granted qualified immunity, probably because they are government affiliated, and the facts have already been presented, but there's only so much we could do with such a dodgy investigation, if you can even believe that. Because it's insane to me that the home was never entered at once, at all. Like, I just want to paint a picture for you. You, as a regular individual, every single person, if you just threw a regular party and somebody ends up dead, particularly a police officer, on your lawn, not only is your house a crime scene, you and everyone else in that house are now suspects, whether you like it or not. In this case, though, there's no crime scene. They testified that they didn't even think it was necessary. No crime scene, no implication of any other witnesses and or people involved. Just pin it all on Karen. So unfortunately, we may never, ever know the truth. And the scariest part of all of this to me is that there is someone or multiple people out there that do know the truth. And if it wasn't Karen Read, they were going to let this woman rot in prison, potentially for the rest of her entire life. And there is a dead, innocent, loving police officer, man, brother, uncle, whatever, now dead, with no other leads, because of the negligence and the corruption of that state's and county's police department. In the defense closing arguments, Alan Jackson, who, just side note by the way, Alan Jackson and a woman named Elizabeth Little were also the same the same attorneys that worked on the Kevin Spacey case recently. So, this case is absolutely insane that all of these people tie in and then Kevin Spacey's involved and the judge is involved and it's all crazy. Regardless, defense attorney Alan Jackson, who fought blood, tears, sweat, all of it in defense of Karen Read, summarizes it perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and play just a brief minute of it, and I want you to take a listen to the passion in his voice when speaking on this case.
A police officer, is found dead on the front lawn, and no one secures the scene. No tape, no preservation of evidence, no crime scene log, no search warrants, no consent searches, no photographs of the house interior. They didn't treat the house as a crime scene, and shamefully, they didn't even treat the yard as a crime scene. The lame excuse offered by retired Lieutenant Gallagher: it was really cold and windy, and I didn't know if there was a crime that had been committed. What? You didn't know that a crime had potentially been committed? You have a man laying dead in the yard, and here are the undisputed facts that those officers we're confronted with. Black eyes. Obviously, black eyes are consistent with a fight. Bloody nose, also consistent with a fight. Bleeding from the face, consistent with a physical altercation. A cut over the right eye, consistent with a punch. No coat in the freezing cold, not dressed for outside, dressed for inside, and one shoe on. I wonder where the other shoe could be. I don't know, maybe in the house 30 feet away. And then you find a broken and shattered drinking glass next to him, the type of glass that you might find, I don't know, let me think about this, in a kitchen, in a house, 30 feet away. And John's phone was tucked neatly under his back shoulder. Lieutenant Gallagher actually claimed he did not know it was a potential crime that needed investigating. The neighbor across the street, Detective Lieutenant Kelleher, had a ring camera that was pointed at the exact direction where John O'Keefe would have been hit, and nobody bothered to secure it. Nobody bothered to secure it. Nobody even bothered to look at it. Of course this was a potential crime scene. Of course it was. Let's not forget, this was Brian Albert's house, and that comes with privileges. Quote, is the homeowner going to catch any shit? Nope. He's a Boston cop too, end quote. That quote starts to make a little more sense now, doesn't it? Michael Proctor wrote those words just hours after John's body was found. He sent this in a private chat, in a private text he never, ever believed would ever be revealed. He sent that text in a series of messages that now belong to you. You weren't given the opportunity to hear from Michael Proctor, but you can read his thoughts for yourself. And I urge you, go read them. They're in Exhibit 209, in case you're wondering.
But at the end of the day, whether you believe she did it or not, the jury did have a duty to acquit her on all counts of murder because they just simply could not prove it. And I'd like to know your thing, as always. Do you think that she did it? Do you think that she's in on it? Do you think that these other people know what really went down? Do you think it was a one-on-one fight? Do you think that he was hit by the car? Do you think the dog was involved? Do you think that it was as corrupt as the picture I just painted you, from the judge to the police department to the chief investigator? Do we think that there's a bigger conspiracy here going on and that his death will never be avenged? Because if it is, that is just heartbreaking. I mean, somebody's got to get involved and do something here. I don't care if it's a private investigator. I don't care if we got to raise money, but something has to happen here because John O'Keefe cannot die in vain like this and all of these nasty monsters just walk amongst us. I mean, I don't even know how to fathom that. But at the end of the day, this has been Here's My Thing, starring Frankie Salazar, and I will see you in the next one.